Hello fellow Krieg and Warhammer 40k players. Today the Warhammer community website just showed us some new things for the Death Korps of Krieg and what's going to be inside the new Imperial Armor Compendium. So we're going to be taking a look at that, a look at the new Krieg Doctrine, and also what units have been cut from the Krieg roster and the Astra Militarum Forgeworld roster as a whole. So, first we have Krieg Cult Sacrifice. The Death Korps of Krieg are unafraid of death, famed for their willingness to fight no matter the odds, and sacrifice themselves on the field of battle in the Emperor's name. First bullet point, each time a combat attrition test is taken for a unit with this doctrine, ignore any or all modifiers. And the second bullet point, if a character or vehicle unit with this doctrine is destroyed by an attack made by an enemy model and that model did not explode, roll 1d6. On a 4+, do not remove the destroyed model from play. It can, after the attacking model's unit has finished making its attacks, either shoot with one of its ranged weapons, as if it were your shooting phase, or make one attack with one of its melee weapons as if it were the fight phase. When resolving these attacks, your model is considered to have one wound remaining. After resolving these attacks, the destroyed model is then removed. So, let's take a look at the first one. Essentially, this is really just a worse Cult of Sacrifice. Prior to this, with Cult of Sacrifice, we completely ignored shooting casualties, so we really didn't take morale tests all that often, unless you got into melee combat. So yeah, this isn't great because we're still having to take morale tests, and we're still having to take combat attrition tests on top of that. We can't just ignore combat attrition tests, which would have been better than this at least. So yeah, definitely not that great. I would have much rather just kept the same Cult of Sacrifice. The second part, so we finally have a vehicle doctrine. And it's really bad. Alright, so first for the vehicle doctrine, this is only going to activate on a 4+, assuming you didn't explode. And for the character portion, it's essentially just duty unto death if you're in melee, where on a 4+, you'll be able to make one attack. Or it lets you make a shooting attack. And none of our characters bracket except for tank commanders, assuming we can still take them. So yeah, from our standard characters, you're really not going to get much from that. One power sword attack at strength 4 is probably not going to kill anything. Neither is, a couple of bolter shots or lasgun shots. So now I'll go ahead and put some math up here for the vehicle doctrine, taking a standard Lehman Russ, which, keep in mind, won't have grinding advance because it's probably not dying in your shooting phase. And it's on its lowest bracket, so as you can tell, it's not going to kill a single Primaris or Firstborn Marine. And again, this is a 50-50 chance of even being able to shoot this. From best to worst, we have the Demolisher in first with 1.42 damage. We have the Annihilator and the Executioner with 0.81 damage. We have the Punisher with 0.74 damage. We have the Battle Cannon with 0.65 damage. The Lehman Russ Vanquisher and the Eradicator with 0.52 damage, and in last we have the Exterminator with 0.44 damage. Still no dead Marines. Alright, so now how do we fix these doctrines? My first suggestion would be either that they revert Cult of Sacrifice back to its original form, that way you ignore shooting casualties in the morale phase, or you make Cult of Sacrifice ignore combat attrition tests. For the vehicle doctrine side, the vehicle either needs to be able to use its highest bracket when it dies, or maybe make the ability automatically trigger if the vehicle doesn't explode, or give the vehicle the ability to fire all weapons, or something in combination with those. As far as the melee aspect goes, the characters and vehicles should be able to make their full number of attacks. If you aren't going to use the same doctrine, maybe make it more thematic with Krieg as a whole. So either being able to move fully and still grinding advance with tanks, or being able to advance and shoot. And in addition to that, it would be good to add something for artillery, since Krieg uses a lot of artillery, including the carriages. A suggestion I have is a +1 to hit against a target that didn't move in its previous movement phase. Lastly, Cult of Sacrifice should include a army-wide 3+ weapon skill, and crack grenades on all non-vehicle units. Alright, so now for units that are not in the index. We'll start off with Death Corps specific units. We have the Field Officer, who was our cheapest HQ slot, Karsvener, who was our one named character, and he had 3 orders and also had a nice Leadership 9 aura buff if you got into melee. Grenadiers, that was our best troop choice in this transition, and they had ballistic skill 3+, so they made very good special weapon platforms, and they comboed well with the Centaur light assault carrier as well. Infantry squads are most likely going to use the standard codex data sheet, meaning we should gain access to heavy weapon teams, but we'll probably lose the options on our Watchmaster, such as a lasgun and a hotshot lasgun or dual pistols. Commissars, we didn't really use them, but since the new Cult of Sacrifice is not so great, we'll probably be using them a lot more. Death Rider Commissar did have its uses with Death Rider units, since he had a Leadership 8 buff, but I didn't expect him to make it since he was a Games Day exclusive model. Quartermasters were incredibly good with large infantry blobs since they give out a 6+ feel no pain. Definitely running massed infantry will not be as good anymore, especially with the changes to Cult of Sacrifice. Hopefully he ends up being rolled into the command squad. For command squads, they had a unique standard, which was the regimental standard, which was a +1 attack aura. But at the same time, they had more limitations. They couldn't take metapacks, and they could only have 2 special weapons, and they couldn't take a heavy weapons team. Most likely this one will just draw from the standard Imperial Guard Codex, and hopefully it will allow for those options. The Centaur, both the light assault carrier and the light carrier. The assault carrier was a very good unit in combination with Grenadiers, especially Melta squads, as it had a 9-inch pregame move if you loaded it up with Grenadiers. And it didn't bracket, so you could get across the board really fast. Also, with the loss of both of these, we no longer have a way to move artillery batteries unless they update the Trojan to be able to tow them. The Storm Chimera was actually getting some use in this transition between 8th and 9th with large 10-man Grenadier units, but since the autocannon turret is no longer in production, I'm guessing we'll most likely be able to use standard Chimeras. Last for Krieg, we have Mars Alpha Lehman Russes. Most likely we're just going to be using standard Lehman Russ data sheets. That does mean we lose the +1 to our saves against strength 4 or less, though that was not the most helpful ability anyways. For non-Krieg, we have the standard Centaur again. We also have the Griffin pattern Chimera, so you can't have an autocannon or twin heavy bolter Chimera anymore. The Tauros assault vehicle, which was just a very alright fast attack choice, and the Tauros Venator, which was able to field some las cannons. Both these make sense given that they're out of production and the entire Elysian range was dropped as well. The Salmon Scout Tank was the 3rd lost fast attack choice. Basically just an upgraded Sentinel that had 2 Sentinel guns and that was on a Chimera chassis. Wasn't the most useful, so it's not a huge loss. The Salamander Command Tank was nice as it gave a +1 to hit buff to a vehicle within 6 inches of it, I believe. It was fun using it to buff super heavy tanks, but it really wasn't worth the points cost. The Atlas Recovery Tank, that's been out of production for a while now, and it wasn't really seeing a lot of use anyways. The Aquila Lander, which is a very cool looking traditional Imperial flyer. It could deep strike, which was cool, but it only had a transport cap of 7, so it wasn't all that useful. The Manticore, Hydra, and Earthshaker batteries are all gone. These were the ones that were on those cross platforms, and were really cool looking models that were fun in artillery based armies. The Griffin mortar carrier, which was the mobile heavy mortar, is a decent loss because it's essentially just a better standard heavy mortar, as it ignored cover and it rolled 2d6 for shots and kept the highest number so hopefully the heavy mortars will get the same abilities. The Leman Russ Conqueror was the best non-tank Commander Leman Russ variant, and well, that one's gone as well. The Leman Russ Annihilator was the twin las cannon Leman Russ variant, and that is no longer here. So if you want anti-armor, you're probably going to have to take a Demolisher. The Styges Vanquisher and the Ryza pattern Vanquishers are both gone as well. These essentially just had the same ability as the Leman Russ Conqueror, where if the coaxial gun shot at the target, you'd reroll failed hit rolls for the main gun, which in this case was the Vanquisher cannon. And they also added one to their hit rolls if they stood still. Not really a huge loss given that the Vanquisher has not been that good of a turret. The Arcurian pattern Stormhammer, Storm Sword, and Shadow Sword. The Storm Sword and the Shadow Sword are essentially just the same as the Codex datasheets, missing a las cannon here and there. The Stormhammer, on the other hand, was actually pretty unique given that it's made for Solar Auxiliary 30k. You had a twin battle cannon, the Stormhammer cannon, I don't remember what it was called, and then you had 6 sponsons, which could be equipped with multi-lasers, las cannons, and so it made for a decent anti-vehicle platform. So that's kind of a loss, and given that that's weird because they actually still make the Stormhammer model. The Saber weapon batteries, again, something that's been out of production for a while. And since Space Marines literally have the same thing now, I guess Imperial Guard players don't need it. Sentinel Powerlifters were pretty neat in that it's just a melee-based Sentinel with a Power Fist, pretty much. Then you have the Destroyer Tank Hunter, which was not all that great in 8th edition. And it's also been out of production for a while, though they still make the Thunder, and the kits are almost the same. So I really don't know why they can't just bring it back in production. The Dominus Armored Siege Bombard was lost, given that it never even had a model anyways, so I'm not sure why they continued to support it. The Macarius Omega was also lost, and so that kind of stinks since that was the plasma variant of the Macarius tank line. And lastly, the Gorgon, and that just got re-released 8 or so months ago, so I'm very surprised that they did not continue support for it, but we'll see. Lastly, and I forgot about this one, is the Artemia pattern Hellhound, and this is simply just a different variant of the Hellhound that would roll 2d6 for a number of shots and keep the highest, and had 2 damage on its Inferno cannon. So in conclusion, it's not looking so good for Krieg so far with these changes to Cult of Sacrifice. Hopefully the future previews this week will show us some more of how Krieg will be working in 9th.